What seemed like a miracle quickly twisted into a nightmare. Instead of help, the man who came to save it reached for a needle and a gun. But the woman refused to back down because something about this little animal wasn't right. A hidden mark, a strange stain, clues that pointed to a darker truth no one expected. Suddenly, her quiet life was thrown into danger warnings left at her door. Strangers watching from the shadows, and a powerful force determined to silence her. Why was the cub really left in her yard? Who wanted it dead, and how far would they go to keep the truth buried? When one act of courage collides with a deadly secret, the fight for survival begins. Would you risk everything to protect the helpless when standing up means putting your own life on the line? Before we begin, let me know where you're watching from. It turns this little corner of the internet into something bigger, something shared. The early morning light painted soft shadows across Romy Kincaid's garden as she stepped outside, her nursing shoes crunching against the dewy grass. After a long 12-hour night shift at the hospice center, these quiet moments in her garden were usually her sanctuary, but today would be different. Her tired eyes swept across the familiar landscape. The climbing roses she'd planted last spring, the herb garden bursting with fragrant rosemary and thyme. Then she saw it. Her heart skipped a beat. There, curled up beside her largest rosemary bush, lay what appeared to be a lifeless bobcat cub. "Oh no," she whispered, her nursing instincts immediately kicking in despite her exhaustion. The small creature couldn't have been more than a few months old. It spotted fur, matted and still. Years of hospice work had taught Romy to approach death with reverence. But seeing such a young wild creature seemingly gone broke her heart. She carefully approached, her movements slow and deliberate. The morning dew had soaked through the cub's fur, making it look even smaller and more vulnerable. Romy knelt beside it, her clinical training taking over as she looked for any signs of life. She didn't dare touch it yet, knowing even a young bobcat could be dangerous. "Poor little thing," she murmured, leaning closer to check for breathing. That's when it happened. The cub's body shuddered ever so slightly, and a faint, barely perceptible breath escaped its tiny mouth. Romy gasped, stumbling backward in surprise. "You're alive." Her voice came out as a shocked whisper. The cub didn't move again, but she could now see the almost imperceptible rise and fall of its chest. Her mind raced with conflicting emotions. Joy that the creature was alive, fear of what that meant, and uncertainty about what to do next. Drawing on her years of medical experience, Romy quickly assessed the situation. The cub was clearly in distress, possibly injured or ill. But this wasn't like dealing with her human patients. This was a wild animal, potentially dangerous even in its weakened state. And somewhere nearby, there might be a protective mother bobcat searching for her baby. Her hands shook slightly as she pulled her phone from her scrub's pocket. She knew she needed help, but who to call? The local vet wouldn't handle wildlife, and she couldn't just leave the poor thing to suffer. After a moment's hesitation, she dialed County Wildlife Control. "County Wildlife Control. How can I help you?" The voice on the other end sounded bored, almost mechanical. "Yes, hello," Romy said, keeping her voice low and calm while watching the cub. "I've found an injured bobcat cub in my garden. It's alive but barely breathing. I need someone to come help it." There was a pause on the other end. "What's your address?" Romy provided her information, then added, "Please hurry. I don't know how long it has been here, but it's in really bad shape." "Someone will be there within the hour," the operator said, then hung up without further comment. Romy stood guard over the small creature, her nurturing instincts warring with common sense. She wanted to help, to somehow make it more comfortable, but she knew better than to touch a wild animal. Instead, she watched its shallow breathing, counting the seconds between each small rise of its chest. Just as she did with her most critical patients, the sun climbed higher in the sky as she waited, casting longer shadows across her garden. The morning air grew warmer, and still the cub didn't move except for those tiny, precious breaths. Romy found herself talking softly to it, the way she often did with her patients who were hovering between life and death. "Hold on, little one," she murmured. "Help is coming. Just hold on." A car door slammed in front of her house, making her jump. Heavy footsteps approached around the side of the house, and a man in a dark green uniform appeared. His name tag read, Officer Wilson, but something about his demeanor made Romy uneasy. He didn't carry any animal handling equipment, no catch pole, no transport cage. Nothing she would expect for a wildlife rescue. "Ma'am," he said curtly, his eyes darting around the garden before settling on the cub. "Step back, please." Romy took a few steps backward, watching as the officer approached the cub. His movements were quick and careless. Nothing like the careful approach she would expect from someone trained to handle wildlife. "Sir," she started, "the cub is still alive. It needs medical attention. Mom, Please stay back and let me do my job." He cut her off, reaching for something at his belt. To her horror, she realized he was pulling out a gun. "Wait," Romy's voice came out stronger than she expected. "What are you doing? That cub needs help, not standard procedure for injured wildlife in residential areas," he said flatly, not even looking at her. "Can't risk disease transmission or having predators get comfortable around houses." Romy felt her world tilt sideways. She had called for help, for someone to save this precious life, not to end it. Her years of hospice work had taught her about the sacred nature of life and death, about fighting for every breath when there was still hope. This wasn't right. "I won't let you kill it," she said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. "That's not what I called you for. This cub deserves a chance." Officer Wilson turned to face her fully now, his expression hardening. "Ma'am, interfering with a wildlife control officer is a criminal offense. Step back now." But Romy stood her ground, her heart pounding, but her stance firm. She knew, with absolute certainty, that this moment mattered, that her decision here would set something bigger in motion. She had spent her career helping people transition between life and death with dignity and care. She couldn't stand by and watch this life be carelessly snuffed out. Little did she know, her choice to stand up to Officer Wilson would indeed spark a chain of events that would change everything. But, in that moment, all she knew was that she had to protect the vulnerable creature fighting for its life in her garden, no matter the consequences. The rumble of a heavy truck pulling up to the curb broke the morning quiet. Romy watched as a weathered man in his late 50s climbed out, his movements deliberate and practiced. The name badge on his khaki uniform read Harlan Pike, County Wildlife Control. He carried both a holstered sidearm and what looked like a medical kit, but his demeanor suggested he wasn't here to heal. Pike's boots crunched on the gravel as he approached, his eyes fixed on the cub rather than acknowledging Romy. "Ma'am, step back from the animal. It's a public danger." Romy didn't move. Her trained nurse's eyes had caught something concerning. A small puncture wound on the cub's hindquarters, surrounded by an unnatural bluish stain on its fur. This wasn't a natural injury. "Mr. Pike," she said carefully, "this cub has been injured. Look at the puncture wound. And that blue dye. Something's not right here." Pike's face hardened. "What's not right is having a predator in a residential area. Now move aside so I can do my job." He reached for the syringe in his kit. Romy's heart raced, but her voice remained steady. "No. This animal needs medical attention, not euthanasia." She pulled out her phone and started recording, her fingers trembling slightly, but her grip firm. "Put that phone away," Pike growled, taking a step forward. "You're interfering with official county business." "I'm documenting official county business," Romy corrected him, raising her voice slightly. The sound carried across her quiet suburban street, and she noticed curtains twitching in neighboring houses. "This cub has been deliberately injured. As a medical professional, I can't ignore that." More neighbors were emerging now, drawn by the confrontation. Mrs. Chen from next door stood on her porch in her morning robe. Phone also raised. Across the street, the Rodriguez family had paused their car, watching intently instead of leaving for work. Pike's eyes darted around, noting the growing audience. His hand moved away from the syringe, but his expression grew darker. "You want to play it this way? Fine." He pulled out a citation book, scribbling furiously. "This is your official warning for interfering with wildlife control operations. Next time, it's a fine and possible arrest. Possible arrest." He tore off the yellow slip and thrust it at her. Romy took it without breaking eye contact or stopping her recording. "And understand this," Pike continued, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You've made a big mistake here. That cub is dangerous, and so is sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. Don't think this is over." The threat in his voice was unmistakable, but Romy stood her ground. She'd faced down death too many times in her work to be easily intimidated. "You're right, Mr. Pike. This isn't over. Because I'm going to make sure this cub gets proper medical care. And I'm going to find out exactly what happened to it." Pike's jaw clenched. He looked once more at the growing crowd of witnesses, then turned on his heel, then stalked back to his truck. The engine roared to life, and he pulled away from the curb with more force than necessary. Mrs. Chen hurried over as soon as Pike's truck disappeared around the corner. "Romy, are you okay? That man seemed horrible." "I'm fine," Romy assured her, though her hands were shaking as she stopped the recording. "But this little one needs help." She looked down at the citation in her hand, then at the injured cub still breathing softly in her garden. She knew she'd just made a powerful enemy, but seeing that deliberate injury on an innocent animal had triggered something deep inside her. The same instinct that had driven her into nursing. The need to protect and heal. Several neighbors gathered around now, keeping a respectful distance from the cub but offering support. Mr. Rodriguez approached with a cardboard box lined with an old towel. For when the real help arrives, he said with a gentle smile, "My sister works at the wildlife sanctuary in the foothills. Let me call her." Romy nodded gratefully, her eyes still on the cub. The puncture wound and blue dye told a story, one that someone had tried to cover up. Pike's reaction only confirmed her suspicions that something darker was happening. Her decision to stand up to him had put her directly in his crosshairs, but she couldn't regret it. Whatever was going on, she was now part of it, and she would see it through. After Pike's disturbing visit, Romy's hands shook as she searched through her phone contacts. She'd remembered an article in the local paper about wildlife tracking in their area, and thankfully, she'd saved the researcher's number. Finding it, she pressed call. Reed Callahan speaking. A warm, steady voice answered on the third ring. "Mr. Callahan, this is Romy Kincaid. I'm sorry to bother you, but I have a situation with an injured Bobcat Cub, and I could really use your expertise." Her voice trembled slightly as she described the morning's events, including Pike's aggressive behavior and the strange blue stain she'd noticed. There was a long pause on the other end. When Reed spoke again, his tone had shifted from professional to concerned. "Where are you located, Mrs. Kincaid? I can be there in 20 minutes. True to his word, Reed's weathered field truck pulled into her driveway exactly 20 minutes later. Romy watched as he emerged, a lean man in his mid-30s wearing practical outdoor gear. His dark hair slightly disheveled. He carried a field kit and moved with the quiet confidence of someone used to approaching wildlife. "Thank you for coming," Romy said, leading him to where the cub still lay in her garden. The small creature had barely moved, though its breathing seemed slightly stronger. Reed knelt beside the cub, his movements careful and measured. He examined the blue stain without touching the animal, then pulled out a small UV light from his kit. Under the purple glow, the stain fluoresced brightly, just as I feared, he said grimly. "This is marking dye from a tranquilizer dart. We use similar compounds in our research program, but with strict protocols and oversight." He looked up at Romy, his expression serious. This wasn't an accident or a natural injury. Someone deliberately sedated this cub. Romy felt her stomach twist. "But why? And why leave it in my garden?" Reed stood, brushing dirt from his knees. "That's what concerns me. This feels staged. The dosage was calculated, enough to incapacitate, but not kill. And leaving it where you find it." He trailed off, studying her face. "You said Pike showed up quickly. Within 30 minutes of my call," Romy confirmed. "He seemed almost eager to euthanize the cub." "That's not standard protocol," Reed said. "With a juvenile bobcat, the first response should be assessment and potential rehabilitation." He pulled out his phone and started taking photos of the cub and the stained fur. "I've been tracking the local bobcat population for 3 years now. We've lost several of our collared cats recently, officially to natural causes. But this makes me wonder." Romy hugged her arms against the morning chill, though her shiver had nothing to do with the temperature. "What should I do?" "Document everything," Reed advised, his voice firm but gentle. "You've already started with that video of Pike. Keep doing that. Photos, dates, times, any unusual activity." He gestured to the cub. "As for this little one, I'd recommend keeping your distance. I know your instinct is to help, but if someone is trying to create a dangerous situation, we don't want to play into that." "But we can't just leave it," Romy protested. Reed nodded. "I'm going to call in some colleagues from the wildlife sanctuary. They're licensed for rehabilitation and can provide proper care. But Romy," he met her eyes directly, "be careful. If someone is deliberately staging conflicts with predators, they're playing a dangerous game, and they've chosen your property as their stage." Romy looked around her peaceful garden, seeing it differently now. The rosemary bush where she'd found the cub, the bird feeder she maintained, the small vegetable patch she tended with her daughter, it all felt suddenly vulnerable. "Why me?" she wondered aloud. "That's what we need to figure out," Reed said. He pulled out a business card and wrote a number on the back. "This is my personal cell. Call me anytime, day or night, if you notice anything suspicious. I'll have the sanctuary team here within the hour for the cub." As Reed packed up his equipment, Romy felt the weight of what he'd revealed settling over her. This wasn't just about a sick animal anymore. Someone had orchestrated this entire situation, the sedated cub, Pike's aggressive response, the threats. But why? What could anyone gain from creating fear about local wildlife? "One more thing," Reed said as he prepared to leave. "Pike's not the only one with official authority here. I'll file a report about the tranquilizer dye. That creates an official record, which might help protect you if he tries to escalate things." Romy thanked him, watching as he walked back to his truck. His calm competence had helped settle her nerves, but his warnings had opened her eyes to a larger conflict. She looked back at the cub, its small body rising and falling with each breath. Someone had used this innocent creature as a pawn in whatever game they were playing. The nurse in her, the part that had dedicated her life to caring for the vulnerable, felt a fierce determination rise. Whatever was happening, she wouldn't back down. She pulled out her phone and opened a new document, beginning to type out everything that had happened since finding the cub. Reed was right. Documentation would be crucial. As she worked, she could hear Pike's threats echoing in her mind, but they no longer frightened her as much. Now she had allies, evidence, and most importantly, confirmation that her suspicions were justified. Someone was orchestrating danger, but she would be ready for whatever came next. The morning sun had barely crept over the horizon when Romy heard a loud crash outside her house. Her heart jumped into her throat as she rushed to the window. Through the thin curtains, she saw the remains of her mailbox scattered across her front lawn like broken puzzle pieces. "Oh no," she whispered, her hands trembling as she dialed Reed's number. While waiting for him to answer, she grabbed her keys and headed for the door, careful not to wake Tess, who was still asleep upstairs. The cool morning air hit her face as she stepped outside. Metal fragments littered her driveway, and the wooden post that had held her mailbox now stood like a broken tooth. But what made her blood run cold was the sight of her car. A piece of paper was tucked under the windshield wiper, fluttering in the breeze. With shaking fingers, Romy pulled out the note. The message was typed in bold letters: "Keep out of predator business." Romy Reed's voice came through her phone, startling her. "Are you there?" "Someone destroyed my mailbox," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And they left a note on my car. Reed, they're threatening me. Stay right there. I'm coming over." The urgency in his voice made her stomach tighten. 20 minutes later, Reed's dusty truck pulled into her driveway. He jumped out, his face etched with concern. His usually tousled dark hair was even messier than normal, as if he'd rushed out without bothering to comb it. "Show me everything," he said, pulling out his phone to take pictures. As he documented the damage and the note, his jaw tightened. "This isn't random vandalism, Romy. This is connected to something bigger. Something bigger." Inside her kitchen, Reed spread out a map on the table. Red dots marked locations across the county. "These points show where we had active tracking collars on bobcats," he explained, his finger tracing a pattern. "Over the past 3 months, 12 collars have gone silent in this specific area." He tapped a section of the map. "What's there?" Romy asked, leaning closer. "That's the interesting part. This whole section was recently bought by Elias Brannigan. He's planning to build a luxury equestrian resort. We're talking high-end stables, riding trails, the works." Romy frowned. "The developer? I've seen his name on billboards around town." "Yeah, and he's got a county hearing coming up next week. He needs to prove the land is safe for his wealthy clients. And their expensive horses." Reed's voice carried a note of disgust. "Guess who's providing the wildlife assessment for the property?" "Pike," Romy said, the pieces clicking into place. "He's going to claim the bobcats are a threat." "Exactly. And Pike stands to make a fortune from the removal contract." Reed ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Think about it. The collars, going silent, the injured cub in your garden, the threats. It's all connected. They're orchestrating a predator panic to justify clearing the land." Romy sank into a kitchen chair, her mind spinning. "So, when I helped that cub, you accidentally stumbled into their scheme." Reed finished. "Pike probably planned to use that cub as evidence of dangerous predators moving into residential areas. When you interfered and recorded him, you became a threat." A car door slammed outside, making Romy jump. But it was just her elderly neighbor retrieving her morning paper. Still, the fear lingered. "What can we do?" she asked, wrapping her arms around herself. Reed pulled up a chair beside her. "First, we document everything. I've been tracking the collar failures, and now we have evidence of intimidation. Second, we need to attend that county hearing. Brannigan will try to paint these animals as dangerous predators that need to be removed. We need to present the truth. But what about these threats? What if they escalate?" "I'll help you set up security cameras," Reed assured her. "And I'm giving you my personal number. Call me anytime, day or night. We're in this together now." As if to emphasize the point, a shadow passed across her kitchen window. They both tensed, but it was just a bird flying past. Still, the message was clear. They were being watched. "I never wanted to be caught up in something like this," Romy admitted, her voice small. "I'm just a hospice nurse. I only wanted to help an injured animal." Reed's eyes softened. "Sometimes doing the right thing means standing up to people who are doing wrong." You've got more courage than you realize, Romy. She thought about the frightened cub, about Pike's threatening behavior, about Brannigan's plans to destroy the Bobcat's habitat for profit. The fear was still there, but something else was growing stronger: determination. When is the county hearing? She asked. Next Thursday at 10 in the morning. Brannigan will have his lawyers and Pike will have his evidence, but we'll have the truth, and sometimes that's the most powerful weapon of all. Looking at the broken pieces of her mailbox through the window, Romy realized there was no turning back now. She'd stumbled into something much bigger than a wounded cub, but backing down would mean letting the bullies win. Whatever came next, she would face it, not just for the Bobcats, but for everyone who believed that doing the right thing still mattered. The rising sun cast long shadows across her kitchen floor. As they continued studying the map, marking patterns and making plans, the threats against her were real, but so was her resolve. Sometimes the most important battles found you when you least expected them, and Romy was beginning to understand that this was one worth fighting. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as Reed carefully mounted the last trail camera to a sturdy oak tree overlooking Romy's backyard. They had positioned for cameras strategically around the property, hoping to capture evidence of the Bobcat mother and any suspicious activity. These are motion activated, Reed explained. Adjusting the angle, they'll record anything that moves. Through here, day or night. Tess stood nearby, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. At 16, she carried herself with the awkward mix of childhood fear and emerging adult determination. What if those people come back? She asked, her voice wavering slightly. Romy moved closer to her daughter, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. That's exactly why we need these cameras. If anyone tries anything, we'll have proof. But what about right now? What if they're watching us set them up? Reed descended from the stepladder, his expression serious. That's why I parked my truck, where it's visible from the road. Let them see us. Let them know we're not hiding. The past few days had been tense in the Kincaid household. After finding the threatening note on her car, Romy had sat down with Tess and explained everything. The injured cub, Pike's suspicious behavior, and Reed's discovery about the missing tracking collars. To her surprise, Tess hadn't asked to leave or stay with her father. Instead, she'd grown fiercely protective of both her mother and their unexpected ward. I could have gone to Dad's, Tess said later that evening as they sat in their living room, watching the security feed from the cameras on Reed's laptop. But I won't let them scare us away from our own home. Romy squeezed her daughter's hand, touched by her loyalty but worried about the risks. The injured cub was recovering in their secured garage, gaining strength day by day. Reed had helped them set up a proper enclosure, ensuring the animal had everything it needed while maintaining minimal human contact. Movement on camera 3, Reed announced, pointing to the screen. They all leaned forward, hearts racing, but it was just a deer passing through the yard. The hours crept by. Reed stayed until midnight, showing them how to monitor the feeds and what to watch for. Before leaving, he programmed his number on speed dial on both their phones. Remember, call me instantly if anything seems off. I'm only 15 minutes away. That night, Romy barely slept. Every rustle of leaves, every distant car sound had her reaching for her phone. Tess had dragged her mattress into her mother's room, neither of them wanting to be alone. The next 2 days passed in a blur of nervous vigilance. They took turns monitoring the cameras, maintaining their normal routines as best they could. Romy went to her nursing shifts while Tess attended school, both carrying their phones constantly. It was on the third night that everything changed. Romy was checking the cameras one last time before bed when she noticed movement on camera 2. The dark figures were scaling their back fence with practiced ease. Her heart stopped as she recognized the glint of weapons in their hands. Tess, she whispered urgently, rushing to her daughter's room. We need to go. Now. They had practiced this, had a plan in place. Grabbing their pre-packed emergency backpacks, they moved silently toward their designated escape route, the back door that led to the ravine behind their property. The sound of breaking glass from the garage spurred them faster. Then came a sharp crack, a gunshot that shattered the night silence. Tess stifled a scream as Romy pulled her toward the ravine's path. They scrambled down the steep incline, their feet sliding on loose rocks and dirt. Another shot rang out, closer this time. The beam of a flashlight swept past them as they pressed themselves against the ravine wall. There they are, a harsh voice called out. Romy pushed Tess ahead of her, using her own body as a shield as they moved along a narrow ledge. Below them, the ravine dropped away into darkness. Above, footsteps crunched on gravel, getting closer. They reached a dead end. The ledge narrowed to nothing, with only a sheer drop beyond. Romy pressed Tess against the rock face, covering her daughter with her body. Her mind raced desperately, but there was nowhere else to go. The flashlight beam found them, blinding in its intensity. Romy could make out the silhouettes at the top of the ravine, one raising what was clearly a rifle. Time seemed to slow. Romy closed her eyes, holding Tess tighter, preparing for the worst, when a bone-chilling screech split the air. Something large and fast shot past them, launching itself toward the attackers. The mother bobcat, powerful and fierce, had appeared as if from nowhere. Her sudden attack sent the intruders scrambling backward in panic. One dropped their rifle, which clattered down the ravine. The other fired wildly into the air before both men fled, the bobcats' enraged screams following them into the night. The morning after their terrifying escape, Romy stood in her garden as the first rays of sunlight painted the sky in soft pinks and oranges. Her body ached from the previous night's ordeal, but she couldn't rest. Something had been nagging at her mind, drawing her back to where this all began, the spot where she'd first found the Bobcat Cub. Kneeling beside her rosemary bush, she began carefully sifting through the mulch with gloved hands. The morning dew had settled on everything, making the earth smell rich and alive. After several minutes of methodical searching, something caught her eye, a tiny metallic glint among the dark soil. With trembling fingers, Romy extracted what looked like a sophisticated dart, no longer than her pinky finger. Its sleek design and bright blue residue matched exactly what she'd seen staining the cub's fur that first morning. "Reed," she whispered into her phone minutes later. "I found something you need to see." He arrived within the hour, his usually calm demeanor giving way to barely contained excitement when she showed him the dart. "This is exactly what we needed," he said, carefully examining the tiny projectile. "These aren't standard issue. They're specialized micro darts, and I know exactly who supplies them in this region." Inside her kitchen, Romy watched as Reed made several calls, speaking in quick, technical terms with colleagues. Tess sat at the counter, still in her pajamas, hanging on every word while clutching a mug of hot chocolate. "The supplier confirmed it," Reed announced finally, putting down his phone. His face had grown serious. "Pike ordered a batch of these specific darts 3 weeks ago. But here's what's interesting. The purchase was made through Brannigan's development company, not the county." Romy felt her stomach drop. "So Brannigan's involved directly. It gets worse," Reed continued, pulling out his laptop. "I've been mapping the locations of all our missing Bobcat collars. Every single one went dark within half a mile of Brannigan's proposed resort boundaries. At first, I thought Pike was just killing cats that wandered onto the property, but this," he held up the dart, "this suggests something far more calculated." Tess leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Reed's expression darkened. "These darts are designed for precise, controlled sedation. They're expensive and require training to use. Someone deliberately captured that cub, sedated it, and placed it where Romy would find it. They used it as bait." Romy whispered, the horrible truth dawning on her. "They wanted me to find it. They wanted everyone to think we had dangerous predators stalking our neighborhoods." "Exactly," Reed confirmed. "Create enough fear and incidents. And suddenly Brannigan's calls for predator removal don't seem extreme. They seem necessary. The county would have to grant permits for clearing the area of bobcats before construction could begin." Tess's face crumpled in disgust. "They hurt an innocent baby animal just to scare people?" Romy reached for her daughter's hand, her mind racing. Through every interaction with Pike, every threatening note, every moment of fear they'd endured, the cub was never the real target, she realized. It was about manufacturing proof. They needed witnesses, documentation of dangerous predators threatening residential areas. And when you didn't react the way they wanted, when you protected the cub instead of calling for its removal, you became a problem, Reed added grimly. "You had evidence of their scheme on your phone. You could expose everything." Romy thought about the videos she'd taken of Pike trying to euthanize the cub, the pictures of the dart, the threatening notes she'd documented. "That's why they came after us last night," she said softly. "They weren't just trying to get the cub. They wanted to destroy any evidence we had. But they failed," Tess said firmly, squeezing her mother's hand. "And now we have proof of what they did." Reed nodded, his expression determined. "The dart is physical evidence linking Pike and Brannigan directly to the scheme. Combined with your documentation and my tracking data, we can prove this was a deliberate attempt to manipulate public opinion through staged incidents." "They'll come after us again," Romy said, not as a question, but as a simple fact. She looked at her daughter, then back at Reed. "We're a threat to their entire operation now, which is why we need to move quickly," Reed replied, already typing on his laptop. "I'm contacting my colleagues at the Wildlife Federation and the Environmental Protection Agency. We need to get this evidence into the right hands before Brannigan and Pike can cover their tracks." Romy felt a strange calm settle over her, despite the danger. For weeks, she'd been reacting to threats, trying to protect her family and the injured cub. But now, finally understanding the full scope of what they'd uncovered, she felt something else, purpose. "We're not running," she declared, looking between Reed and Tess. They tried to use fear to get what they wanted. They hurt innocent animals and threatened families. "We have the truth now, and we're going to use it." Tess straightened in her chair, her jaw set in determination that matched her mother's. "They messed with the wrong family." Reed looked at them both with admiration and concern. "We'll need to be careful. Brannigan has connections, and Pike's already shown he's willing to use violence. Then we'll be careful," Romy said firmly. "But we're not backing down. Not now that we know what's really happening." The morning sun had fully risen now, streaming through the kitchen windows and illuminating the tiny dart that had revealed so much. In her garden, Romy could hear birds beginning their daily songs, life continuing despite the darkness they'd uncovered. She thought of the mother bobcat who'd saved them, of her injured cub slowly healing in their garage, and knew with absolute certainty that they were doing the right thing. The truth had finally emerged from the shadows, and with it came both danger and hope. Romy knew the real fight was just beginning, but for the first time since finding the cub, she felt ready for whatever came next. They had evidence, they had each other, and most importantly, they had the truth on their side. Romy's hands shook slightly as she clipped the tiny recording device to the inside of her jacket collar. The small black disc, no bigger than a quarter, connected directly to her cloud storage, a safety measure she never thought she'd need. Her daughter Tess's worried face flashed in her mind, but Romy pushed the image away. She had to focus. The meeting place Pike had chosen was the old ranger station parking lot, now mostly abandoned except for occasional maintenance crews. Gravel crunched under Romy's boots as she walked toward the weathered wooden building. Pike's mud-splattered truck already waited there, its engine ticking as it cooled. "Didn't think you'd show," Pike called out, emerging from the shadow of the building. His stocky frame moved with deliberate slowness, like a predator trying not to spook its prey. "Changed your mind about that Bobcat situation, have you?" Romy forced herself to meet his gaze, channeling years of dealing with difficult patients. "I've been thinking about what you said," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "About the dangers. My daughter's safety has to come first." Pike's weather-beaten face cracked into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well now, that's what I call good sense finally kicking in. About time someone listened to reason around here. I just want to understand exactly how you'll handle it," Romy said, careful to keep her tone curious rather than accusatory. "Make sure everything's proper." Pike laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the station walls. "Proper? Like what Brannigan's having me do up on the ridge? Trust me, lady. Proper's got nothing to do with it when there's money involved." Romy's heart quickened. He was taking the bait. "What do you mean?" "Means simple enough. Rich folks want their fancy horse playground, can't have wild predators spooking their precious thoroughbreds. So we clean house." Pike spat on the ground. "Been darting and relocating those cats for months now. Some don't make it through the move if you catch my meaning. Brannigan gets his permits, I get paid, everybody wins. Except the bobcats," Romy said softly. "Nature of the business, sweetheart." Speaking of which, Pike's eyes narrowed, focusing on something near Romy's collar. Her blood ran cold as his expression darkened. "What's that little black thing you got there?" Before Romy could react, Pike's hand shot out, grabbing her jacket. The recording device clattered to the ground. Pike's face contorted with rage as he recognized what it was. "You stupid bye!" He lunged forward, shoving Romy hard. She stumbled backward, her feet sliding on loose gravel. Behind her, the ground suddenly dropped away, the entrance to a large storm drain culvert. Romy fell, her cry cut short as she hit the slick concrete tunnel. Cold water shocked her system. Recent rains had left the culvert partially filled. The current grabbed her, pulling her deeper into the darkness. Panic seized her chest as water filled her nose and mouth. The tunnel seemed endless, a nightmare of rushing water and scraping concrete. Her lungs burned. She couldn't tell which way was up. Her jacket caught on something underwater, holding her down. With desperate strength, Romy twisted free of the jacket, her fingers finding a seam in the concrete. She pulled herself up, gasping as her head broke the surface. Ahead, a circle of daylight marked the tunnel's exit. Fighting the current, she dragged herself toward it. Her body screamed in protest as she finally hauled herself onto the muddy bank. Everything hurt. Her clothes were torn, her knees and palms bloody from fighting the concrete. But she was alive. And more importantly, she knew the recording had already uploaded to her cloud storage before Pike knocked the device away. Away. Romy lay there in the mud, catching her breath, the sound of running water mixing with her pounding heartbeat. She had her evidence now. proof of Pike's crimes and Brannigan's scheme. But she'd also learned firsthand just how far they would go to keep their secrets. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows as Romy pressed a bag of frozen peas against her bruised shoulder. Her whole body ached from the culvert incident, but her spirit remained unbroken. Reed sat at her kitchen table, carefully arranging their evidence while Tess hovered nearby. Worry etched across her young face. "Mom, you need to rest," Tess insisted, placing a steaming mug of tea beside her mother. "We don't have time," Romy replied, her voice hoarse but determined. "The county hearing is tomorrow morning." Reed spread out a large map marked with red X's, each representing a dead tracking collar. "These patterns are unmistakable," he explained, tracing a line with his finger. Every single collar went silent within half a mile of Brannigan's proposed resort property. Tess leaned in, studying the map. "It's like a ring around where he wants to build." "Exactly," Reed confirmed, pulling out his laptop. "And now we have Pike's confession on record." He pressed play, and Pike's gruff voice filled the kitchen, bragging about cleaning the ridge for Brannigan's permits. The recording was crystal clear. Despite the violent encounter that followed, Romy touched her throat reflexively, remembering the terrifying moments in the storm culvert. The evidence was solid, the tranquilizer dart with its telling blue residue, the map pattern of dead collars, and Pike's damning confession. But doubt gnawed at her like a persistent shadow. "What if it's not enough?" she whispered, more to herself than the others. "Brannigan has connections. He'll have lawyers, experts, people who can explain everything away, but they can't explain away the truth." Reed countered firmly. "The physical evidence doesn't lie." Tess watched her mother closely, noting the worry lines creasing her forehead. "What's really bothering you, Mom?" Romy met her daughter's eyes, seeing understanding there that made her heart ache. "I'm scared for you, honey. These men, they've already shown what they're willing to do. Going public at the hearing puts us both at risk." The kitchen fell silent except for the gentle ticking of the wall clock. Tess moved closer to her mother, taking her hand. The gesture reminded Romy of when Tess was small. But now their roles felt somehow reversed. "You know what I've noticed about you?" Tess said softly. "When things get scary, when people need help, you don't run away. You run toward what's right." She squeezed her mother's hand. "So will I." Romy's eyes welled with tears at her daughter's unexpected wisdom and courage. Here was her teenage daughter, who just weeks ago had been considering moving in with her father, now standing firmly beside her in their most challenging moment. Reed gathered the evidence into careful piles. "We'll present everything systematically," he explained. "The dart proves illegal sedation. The collar map shows the pattern. Pike's confession ties it all to Brannigan's development plans. And I'll testify about finding the cub," Romy added, straightening her shoulders despite the pain. "About seeing the blue stains, about Pike's threats. We should make copies of everything," Tess suggested practically. "Multiple copies, stored in different places." Reed nodded approvingly. "Smart thinking. I'll handle that right now." He began scanning documents while Romy and Tess sorted through photographs of the tracking collar locations. As they worked, Romy felt something shifting inside her, fear transforming into resolve. The evidence spread before them told a story of greed, manipulation, and corruption. But it also represented something else, the power of truth to shine light in dark places. "Brannigan's going to present his safety plan first," Reed reminded them, looking out from his laptop. "He'll try to paint predators as an immediate threat to the community. But we know that's a lie," Tess said firmly. "The only threats have come from his people." Romy stood up, wincing slightly but standing tall. The morning sun caught her face, highlighting the determination in her eyes. "Then that's exactly what we'll show everyone." She picked up Pike's confession recording. "This isn't just about saving bobcats anymore. It's about stopping people who think they can frighten and bully their way to whatever they want." Reed and Tess exchanged glances, seeing the strength returning to Romy's bearing. Despite her injuries, despite her fears, she was choosing to face the danger head-on. The evidence they'd gathered would force the truth into the light, if they were brave enough to present it. As they finished organizing their materials for the hearing, Romy felt a curious calm settle over her. The path ahead was clear, even if it wasn't safe. She had truth on her side, and more importantly, she had people willing to stand with her, her fierce, brave daughter, and the steadfast Reed, who'd believed in her from the start. Together, they carefully packed everything they would need for the hearing. Each piece of evidence represented a piece of the truth they would reveal, regardless of the consequences. Romy knew that tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. But with Tess's words echoing in her heart, "You run toward what's right," she was ready to face whatever came. The county hearing room buzzed with tension as residents filed in, filling every available seat. Fluorescent lights cast a harsh glare on the polished presentation boards that Elias Brannigan had arranged at the front of the room. His confident smile never wavered as he adjusted his silk tie, clearly expecting another smooth victory. Romy sat near the back, her face still bearing the marks of Pike's attack. Her split lip throbbed, and bruises bloomed across her cheekbone. Reed sat beside her, a reassuring presence, while Tess squeezed her mother's hand from the other side. The teen's face was set with determination that matched her mother's. The Ridgeview Equestrian Resort represents a family-friendly development that will bring jobs and prosperity to our community, Brannigan began, his voice smooth as honey as he gestured to the artistic renderings. Our plans include riding trails, luxury accommodations, and most importantly, a safe environment for our children. He clicked through slides showing manicured gardens and pristine stables. We've conducted thorough safety assessments, he continued, and our wildlife management contractor has identified serious predator concerns that must be addressed. Harlan Pike sat in the front row, arms crossed, nodding along. He hadn't noticed Romy's presence yet, and she felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she waited for her moment. When Brannigan opened the floor for public comment, Romy slowly rose to her feet. A collective gasp rippled through the room as people took in her battered appearance. Pike's head snapped around, his face darkening with rage when he spotted her. Members of the board, Romy began, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. I have evidence of criminal activity regarding the Predator Management Program. She pulled out her phone and pressed play, Pike's recorded voice filling the room. Yeah. I've been cleaning the ridge for Brannigan's permits, plan a few darts, stage some encounters, and suddenly everyone's begging for removal. Easy money. Sweetheart, those tracking collars at the bottom of the creek can't have evidence of healthy populations getting in the way of progress. The color drained from Brannigan's face as Reed stepped forward, unrolling large maps marked with red X's. These marks show where Bobcat tracking collars went silent, Reed explained, his voice clear and professional. The pattern perfectly matches the proposed resort boundaries. This was systematic eradication, not public safety. Pike lurched to his feet with a roar of fury, launching himself toward Romy. You lying witch, he snarled. But to deputies who had been stationed at the door moved with surprising speed. They caught Pike before he could reach her, forcing him face down onto a table as he continued to struggle and shout threats. The board chairman's gavel cracked against the podium. Order. Order in this hearing. He turned to the sheriff, who had risen from his seat. Sheriff, I believe you're hearing the same confession I am. The sheriff nodded grimly. Yes, sir. We've been building a case, and this evidence fits right in. He moved toward Pike, pulling out his handcuffs. Harlan Pike, you're under arrest for animal cruelty, corruption, and attempted assault. Brannigan tried to maintain control, stepping forward with hands raised. Now, let's not be hasty. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. Motion to immediately suspend Pike's county contract. One board member called out. Seconded, another quickly added. All in favor? The chairman barely needed to ask. Hands shot up around the table as the sheriff led Pike away. The disgraced contractor still shouting threats. Brannigan's carefully constructed plans crumbled before everyone's eyes. The board members were already calling for a full investigation into the resort permits, and Brannigan's polished smile had vanished completely. Romy sagged slightly in relief, supported by Reed on one side and Tess on the other. Neighbors she hadn't even known were on her side came forward to offer congratulations and support. Through the crowd, she caught Brannigan's eye. The developer's face was a mask of cold fury as he gathered his presentation materials, but Romy met his gaze steadily. The truth had finally come to light, and no amount of money or influence could bury it again. Mom, Tess whispered, you did it. You really did it. Reed squeezed her shoulder gently. You stood up for what was right, even when it wasn't easy. Especially when it wasn't easy. The board chairman called for order again, ready to begin discussions about new wildlife protection measures. Romy remained standing tall despite her injuries, knowing that justice had finally been served, not just for her and the Bobcats, but for the entire community that had been deceived for too long. The early morning sun cast long shadows across Romy's garden as she checked her phone, a smile spreading across her tired face. Reed had sent another tracking update. Clear evidence of the mother bobcat and her cub moving together through the chaparral, healthy and free. Look at this, Tess, Romy called out, holding up her phone with her good arm. Her other arm remained secured in a medical brace, a reminder of her encounter with Pike. They're thriving up there. Tess bounded down the porch steps, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Show me, she peered at the screen, studying the GPS markers. They've moved further up the ridge, That's good, right? It's perfect, Romy. Confirmed. Far from any developments, plenty of natural prey. The past few weeks have brought healing, not just for Romy's physical injuries, but for her spirit too. 3 afternoons a week, she volunteered at Wild Haven, the local wildlife rehabilitation center. She learned to bottle feed orphaned fawns, treat injured hawks, and most importantly, understand the delicate balance between human intervention and wild freedom. Ready for school? Romy asked, tucking her phone away. Tess nodded, but lingered on the steps. Mom, remember when I said I might go live with Dad? Romy's heart squeezed tight, but she kept her voice steady. Of course. Well, I want to stay here. With you. Tess rushed forward, wrapping her arms around her mother. Watching you stand up for what's right. Even when it was scary, I've never been more proud to be your daughter. Tears pricked at Romy's eyes as she hugged Tess back. I love you, sweetie. So much. Later that evening, Romy met Reed at their favorite spot on the ridge. The chaparral stirred in the twilight breeze, creating waves of movement across the hillside. Reed helped her navigate the rocky path, his hand steady at her elbow. The tracking data is remarkable, he said, spreading out his tablet. There, establishing a healthy territory, and the cub is learning to hunt. Everything we hoped for. Romy watched the landscape darken into purple shadows. I never thought finding a dying cub in my garden would change everything. Speaking of your garden, Reed said softly, it's coming back to life beautifully. He was right. Where death had once seemed to linger, new growth flourished. The rosemary bush where she'd found the cub had doubled in size, and wildflowers pushed up through the soil where Pike's bootprints had once marked his threads. Like you, Reed continued, his voice gentle. You've bloomed into something extraordinary, Romy. The way you fought for truth, protected the vulnerable. He paused, gathering courage. I'd like to be part of whatever comes next for you if you'll have me. Romy turned to face him, seeing in his eyes the same steady strength that had supported her through the darkest days of their fight. I'd like that very much, she whispered. The chaparral rustled again, and for a moment, Romy thought she glimpsed a familiar tawny shape moving through the brush. Mother and cub, wild and free, exactly as they should be. Her garden below had become more than just a place of healing. It was where she had discovered her true purpose, found her voice, and learned that sometimes the most beautiful transformations begin in moments of deepest darkness. Reed's hand found hers as they watched the wildlife corridor come alive with twilight activity. Together, they stood in comfortable silence, witnesses to the endless cycle of renewal and hope that nature promised, a promise Romy now understood she was meant to protect. If tonight's story sat quietly in your heart, subscribe and send it to someone who might need the same comfort.